Our next speaker is Mr. Richard Widerynski, who came to us from California. He was raised as a in a Polish family in New Jersey. He is the first of his siblings to be born in the United States. He grew up hearing stories of Polish parents' deportations to Siberia as slave labor from their small village in then Eastern Poland. These stories had a great influence on his identity and sense of pride. As he grew older, he could not reconcile the many courageous stories of survival with the American media depiction of Poles or the Polish jokes so popular in the 60s and 70s. As a result, Richard became a voracious reader of European history and took advantage of opportunities to correct the misinformation published about Poland and Polonia. One example being the inappropriate use of Polish concentration camps versus German concentration camps in Poland, which accurately identifies Poland not as a nexus of this evil, but its first victim. Mr. Widerynski resides with his wife Karen in Southern California. He recently retired as an administrator of a hospital for the chronically and persistently mentally ill. He has been a member of the Polish-American Congress of the Southern California for 30 years and served as its president for 7 years. Presently, he serves as its vice president of the American Agenda and is active in promoting Poland's 100th year of independence, which will be celebrated on November 11. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Widerynski.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Rich Widerynski. I would like to tell you a story about my Polish family. At the end of this presentation, I hope you understand 3 things that you might not know, but I think I'm really preaching to the choir because I hear so much Polish here today. First of all, that my parents, as well as millions of Polish citizens of then Eastern Poland, were deported by the Soviets to Siberia. Number 2, you've heard about the genocides of other peoples, the Armenians, the Jews, the Chinese and the Cambodians, but not of the Poles. And number 3, the war in Poland did not end until 1989. When my siblings and I were young, on February 6th of every year, my mother used to call us and say, "What's today's date?" Now you're a little kid, and you look at your siblings, and I don't know. And they said, "February 6th." And she said, "Great, it's February 6th. This is the date that your father and I got married in 1940. Great. February 10th comes along. She calls us in again and said, "What is this date?" By this time, we're a little bit wised up here. We live in New Jersey. And we said, "It's February 10th." And she says, "Correct. And this is the day that we were deported to Siberia." Every year this went on. Every year. We had cousins whose families suffered tremendously, and they never talked with their children about these issues. My parents did, and burned it into our memory and psyche on a daily basis. On the 10th of February, the ritual that my mother described started early in the morning when they heard the door being banged on. They opened the door. 2 Soviet soldiers and several Ukrainian folks, some of whom had been at their wedding a few days before, came in. They ordered them to pack their belongings and deport within 30 minutes. My family, consisting of my grandmother Agnieszka Wieczora, sister Danusha, brother Wiesław, and my parents, Stanisław and Genovefa Widerynska, came to the United States in 1951 on the passenger liner Widerynski. There they were met by their sponsors, my mom's Uncle Michał, who lived in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. They transported the family to Wilkes-Barre, and so began the process of adjusting to life in a new country. During the time they were there, my father began to take a look for work. And Uncle Mihal was a miner in the anthracite mines in Wilkes-Barre, so he invited my father to join and come down into the mine one day. Within a day, my father had enough. He said, I participated in the war from day one to the last day of the war. And he said, I prefer to relive that every day than go down into that mine. That being said, they moved to White House, New Jersey, and stayed with my mother's cousins. And then they moved to a place called Manville, New Jersey. And the reason why is because of the fact that it had a Polish parish, Sacred Heart. They were able to find some work, and within a short period of time, they saved up enough money, borrowed some additional money from the family, and built a house, 2-bedroom house with a full basement. That house was a home that I remember when I was a kid. My youngest sister, Elizabeth, was born in 1957, and she also remembered that house. To continue the story of my parents' odyssey, however, I said the family was awakened by pounding on the door. As I said, 2 Soviet soldiers, armed soldiers, came into the home with these Ukrainian gentlemen as well, and indicated that they had to pull together their stuff and be ready in 30 minutes to hit the road, to get deported. There was a container of vodka on the floor, and the soldiers were eyeing it with interest. It was in the middle of the night. They were interested in vodka, so my mother smashed the bottle. She was threatened with execution for that. Fortunately, they got over it. Folks packed up. Now, they had just been married 4 days before, so they had a lot of food. They had slaughtered a bull, so they had a lot of food. So my mother packed food, warm clothing, and kishinas, down comforters. And then they were escorted out, got into a sleigh. That is to say, my mother, grandma, and grandfather got into the sleigh, or onto the sleigh. Soldiers forced my father to run in the ditch in snow up to his chest and try and keep up with the sleigh. They said, if you don't, we're going to shoot you. Father tried and tried and tried, and finally he just gave himself up to his fate. And they said, okay, we're only kidding. Get on this sleigh. They went down to the railroad station, which was some kilometers away, in a place called Lutsk, which is eastern Poland, was eastern Poland, now is western Ukraine. And what they recognized there was tens of thousands, not thousands, tens of thousands of people that were being ethnically cleansed from the Volyn region. They got onto cattle cars, no heat, hole in the floor, maybe something to burn some wood with to keep them warm, but they were getting into those cattle cars and being systematically sent to the east. 250,000 people, folks, within the next few days were taken from that deportation. Now, most Poles, you hear of Siberia. Some people didn't go to Siberia. My parents didn't either. For 6 weeks, they traveled by train, by boat, and by foot until they got to the Arkhangelsk Oblast, which is technically northern Russia. Now, the issue with the term Siberia, there's a saying in Poland that says that every Polish family can see Siberia from their window. And it's true. So many Poles have been deported to Siberia in the past 300 years because of the uprisings, because of the wars with Russia. And so anything and everything is Siberia. When we got older, when we were getting older, my siblings and I asked my folks questions. We became teenagers, and teenagers asked some uncomfortable truths. And so we said, so folks, why didn't you resist against the Soviet soldiers that night? And my mother said, first of all, we didn't have any weapons. Secondly, Some people did resist. They were shot on the spot. Another thing was, why did you come out? Why didn't you lock the door and say, we're not coming out? Well, some people did that too. So they burned down the house, and when people tried to come out, they threw them back in and burned them alive. Mother described the fact that there were so many people in denial during this process. Some folks actually packed like they were going to church on Sunday with their firearm, climbed into a sled, had gloves, hats, and things of this nature. And I asked my mother, what happened to those people? And she says, oh yeah, they died. The older people died. And the sick and children were the first to go. As I indicated, they journeyed for some 6 weeks. They ended up in Archangels at a place called Poshoek 131. The name of the Poshoek was Slobodchikovo in the Lenskaya region. In the forest where they were housed in large wooden barracks, teeming with lice and bedbugs. The prisoners were immediately directed to begin felling trees, chopping down trees. Those who worked and met their goal, as say the goal of the Russians and the Soviets, they were fed. Those who didn't eat. The men cut down the trees, and the job of the woman was to collect smaller limbs and burn them. Within a short period of time, my mother realized she was pregnant. When my sister Danusha was born, it was necessary to feed the child, especially when my mother was in the forest. So grandmother helped with feeding my sister. So my parents negotiated a deal with the camp commandant, which amounted to taking a 40-year mortgage on a goat. When we were kids, we said, come on, is this true? Well, they said, right. No man was right there with her. My mother laughed when she said that the goat would jump over the fence, go to the commandant's garden, and eat his crops, and then jump back and provide milk to them and their parents. Mother also had the foresight to bring seed potatoes with her. They planted a garden, initially enduring the derisive comments from some of their campmates, like, what's the plant a garden here? We're not going to be here long. When the crops began to ripen and grow, the skeptical, starving neighbors quickly understood the value of this bounty, and in some instances, stole the crop. My sister became ill about a year, when she was about a year old. My mother carried her to a hospital some 10 kilometers away. The doctor there said, there's nothing that can be done for the child, take her back. And they did, and she died. She was buried in a forest where a burgeoning cemetery had taken place, containing many Polish dead. People were dying of exposure, of accidents, and a general lack of food. Remember, the Soviets, they didn't give you an overabundance, they gave you just a little bit. And you couldn't survive on that little bit. She described how a fellow Polish campmate once described the taste of wonderful Polish kielbasa to her. She held her hands together as he had done, and she showed how tenderly he held the kielbasa and described how the grease ran down his arms. I asked my mother what happened to this fellow, and she said, he died. Single prisoners who had no spouses or partners died quickly. She said you had to have a partner who went out and foraged for food in order to survive. Again, the amount of sustenance they provided you wasn't enough to keep you alive in the long term. Soviets didn't care. They had other prisoners backed up, and they were going to take his place. I don't know how my parents became aware of the amnesty that Poles were offered by the Soviet Union in August of 1941 as a result of the Sikorsky-Maisky Pact. But I do know that they were able to sell some belongings in order to secure a spot on a train going east. Remember, going west, you're going back to the Germans that were attacking. My family, along with other unrestrained Poles, began an arduous process of seeking a Polish army that was rumored to be forming somewhere in the Soviet Union. Travel in the Soviet Union was fraught with hazards. Lacked essential issues like water and food. My mother recounted that one day the train stopped and the engineer said, "Okay, you guys can get out, we'll wait for you here." And people saw a village in the distance and they took belongings and they were going to do some trade. That's how they did it. There was no money. The Soviets didn't give them anything but a document that said, "You're free to go." The train suddenly started and went on its way, leaving all of those people there to their own wits. My mother and two other Polish men concocted a daring story and hatched a plot. When the train did stop, they ordered and informed the engineer that they were NKVD, the secret police. The engineer, fearing the dreaded secret police, acquiesced to what the trio wanted. And what they said was, "You're going to find that train. You're going to follow that train until we get there, or else you're in trouble." I says, "Okay." He was terrified about even the word NKVD. They traveled for a few days and eventually caught up with that train. And my father was reunited with my mother to the degree that he shed tears. She said, "Then I knew your father loved me," because he was crying, was not expecting to see her anymore. None of the other people who he trained were ever heard from him. Years later, we had a young gentleman from England, a Polish gentleman, who also was sent to Siberia as a child, and he acknowledged that this story was true, and he also said that he knew it was true because his father was one of those that had detrained and had never reemerged. The family continued to travel east, looking for the Polish army. They worked at a collective farm, a kolkhoz, in Kazakhstan, picking cotton. My granddad decided he was going to take a more proactive stance and hired a camel, with two humps rather than the ones that we know from the Middle East. And he went looking for the Polish army in Kazakhstan. Anybody know how large Kazakhstan is? Some of the people are nodding their heads. Well, you know how big Texas is? Texas is big. Kazakhstan's like 3 Texases. So looking for the Polish army on a camel, not going to make it. He came back and was able to obtain some meat. My father urged him, "Don't eat it. You're starved. Things are not good with your physical system. Don't eat it." Well, Granddad was stubborn, ate the stuff, got red dysentery, and died. Buried in Kazakhstan. My mother came home after foraging for food a few days later and went to look for his grave. Well, the graves that followed Poles all over the Soviet Union and elsewhere were nothing more than deep ditches where they buried people, sprinkled some quicklime on them and buried them again, and put earth on them. So my mother went to look for her father's grave, and the priest there said, he could be in this grave anywhere. We don't know where he's at. And interestingly enough, that priest was one of the gentlemen that my mother joined in that conspiracy to bring the train, to find the train. And he never told anybody about the fact that he was a priest, because, if you're a priest in the Soviet Union, bad things happened to you. Amidst the hunger and disease, lo and behold, my mother's pregnant again. She always said that people marveled that amidst the dying, my parents kept having children. Anusha, the second, was born in Kiev, Russia. It was a staging area for members of the Polish army. My father was in an army encampment in Totskoye and Buzulu, where the Polish army was forming up. The Polish soldiers were housed in large white tents, 10 to a tent. He says every morning they would wake up and a couple of guys were dead, frozen, because it was in the middle of winter. So they would take these people out in one coffin. They didn't have a bunch of coffins. Nobody's going to carry bodies. So they had one coffin, put the remains of the soldier in, went out, dug into the permafrost, and buried the person, came back, got the next one, etc. He says this was a routine thing. General Anders, who had taken control over this army, saw that his soldiers were being whittled away by the elements and decided that the Polish army needed to be in a warmer climate. So they were transported to a place called Tashkent and Samarkand. There, tropical diseases started reaping their toll. Malaria was rampant. And it appears that anywhere the Poles went, one of the things that they were sure to leave was cemeteries. General Anders then decided to move the troops, the army, and the people, which in its total was about 120,000 people, to Persia. Those of you that don't know, Persia and Iran, the same thing. Poles always call Iran Persia. So they crossed the Caspian Sea at Krasnovost and went over to Pahlavi on these huge boats that were sinking much of the time. People sat there, the ships were full of people, and the boats were up to their gunwales, up to almost the top. And in some instances, the ships did sink. My mother said it was so tight on those ships with the thousands on board that you couldn't even turn around. They got over to Persia. And she recounts the fact that the Persian people and the Shah were just wonderful. She often wondered whether they would have made it any further had it not been for that stop in Persia. She said it was, matter of fact, another place that unfortunately a lot of people died was because the Persians came out and fed them. And here were people that were walking skeletons. Think Auschwitz. Think of the concentration camp. Think of it. Polish soldiers were transported to Iraq to relieve the British soldiers who were guarding the oil fields and to recoup their stamina and strength. My mother, grandmother, and sister were transported by the British to South Africa by ship. There they were housed in huts, grass huts, in the Maronellis camp near Salisbury, still in Rhodesia. My mother was an accomplished seamstress, and so she was able to get work in Johannesburg. And she not only got work, she was able to set money aside, and she bought for my father a gold signet ring and his pocket watch, which she provided him when they reunited in Great Britain in 1948. Right after the war, she, my grandma, my sister, and Sept went to England and waited for my father to get mustered out. When they were together, they settled in Birmingham, where my brother Wiesław was born. And then soon many Poles in themselves sensed that the environment in the United States would be more welcoming in light of the negative experiences Poles had under the newly elected British Labour government. So in 1952, they boarded the Queen Elizabeth again as passengers and came to New York. Members of the Polish army in exile, now known as the Polish Second Corps under the leadership of General Władysław Anders, slowly regained their strength in Iraq. They grew in numbers and held military maneuvers in Iraq, Egypt, and Palestine. And in February of 1944, they were transported across the Mediterranean to Italy, to Taranto, Italy. They traveled north from Bari to Bari. As a chief warrant officer, my father took part in the Italian campaign as a member of the 12th Podolski Lancer Regiment. whose role had changed from cavalry to mechanical reconnaissance. During 1944-45, the Second Corps fought with distinction in the Italian campaign in the fourth and final Battle of Monte Cassino. The Poles took a hill on which Monte Cassino rests, and it was my father's outfit that placed the Polish flag on the top of the ruins. The Poles went on to defeat the Germans at Ancona and at Bologna, and in the final offensive in 1945 in Italy. Tragically, British and American Allied leaders agreed to consign Poland into the Soviet sphere of influence. Polish soldiers were encouraged to return to Poland. However, their homes were no longer there, because that part of Poland was now moved. They were in the Soviet Union, or that was in the Soviet Union. Those soldiers who did return, in many instances, were tortured, killed, and in some instances, sent back to Siberia and never heard again. So most of these soldiers prepared to remain in the West. After all the blood was shed, Poland was betrayed to one of its arch enemies. And as I indicated, the war in Poland did not end until 1989. The Soviet Union fell, and the last Russian soldier departed from Polish soil. When we were kids, my father's friends from the Polish Second Corps, from the Podolski Lancers, came to the house a lot. First time, a gentleman by the name of Kazimierz Burbiel came to our house. My father said to my brother and I, who were about 3 or 4 or 5 years old, he says, "Go touch his leg." And we're small kids, and we're kind of asking us for. So we did. Mr. Burbiel was sitting there in the living room, and one leg was hairy, just like everybody's legs. The other leg was cold and smooth. Mr. Burbiel, the hero of Monte Cassino, he was the guy that went out and put the flag on. First of all, he put the flag of the 12th Podolski Lancers on, and then he put the Polish flag. He had continued in the battles afterwards and was shot by the Germans. And any Poles that tried to get up and retrieve him, he was wounded. The Germans shot them too. So they finally threw out a rope and to drag him off, but he lost his leg in that battle. And here he was, sitting in our living room. When you're a little kid, you don't know these people. But at the same time, as you grew older, you thought, wow, it's like the congressman here saying, John Paul II was in my living room, that kind of stuff. At the core, the trials and tribulations faced by Poles are a result of having very aggressive and unfriendly neighbors. But throughout its history, Poland has been a great friend and ally of the United States, and our past and future will be continued to be intertwined. Thank you for providing me an opportunity to share my personal history with you as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Polish independence, and I encourage those of you to read, reflect, and gain greater insight into the role Poland played in World War II. Remember, Poland was the first to fight Hitler, first to fight his aggression. There was no greater ally on the side of the West, and yet Poland was ultimately betrayed, a victim of the war's politics. When the World War II Victory Parade was held in London in 1945, all countries who had participated were invited. Fiji had 2 soldiers in the parade. Poland wasn't invited.